Welcome into Trial Talk. This is Ira Schoffel. I'm here today joined by a special guest that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, know from seeing him on countless television programs, on cable television, network television, here on YouTube. He is a legal expert and really is somebody that we're really excited to have on the program. David Aronberg is a former state attorney from Palm Beach County. He served in that role for 12 years before just deciding recently not to seek re-election. Before that, he was a Florida state senator, and you were the youngest Florida state senator, David. I think you were like 16 at the time, 17, something like that.
At the time, I was 30, and at the time I was the youngest. No longer. Yeah. And I don't know if your viewers know our past, Ira, but you and I have known each other since sixth grade.
We sure have. I was going to go chronologically.
Go ahead.
Before that, you were assistant attorney general in Florida. Before that, you were in the Senate. You were assistant attorney general in Florida. Went after some really high-profile cases. I think one of the first times I think I saw you on national news was when you were going after Miss Cleo and the television psychic, and which was a case that a lot of people kind of laughed at the time. But you actually, I think, recovered hundreds of millions of dollars in telephone fees for people that were using that service, and was kind of exposed as a fraud. Also, you were one of the first people I saw nationally really kind of give a voice to the opioid crisis, and I thought a lot of the work you guys were doing to try to combat that epidemic, which really, the country still deals with. And it's hit my family and many others. But you're also, very high profile. And anytime I think people need a legal voice, a legal expert, you've always been kind enough to go on a lot of different programs and share your opinions. But before that, as you said, you and I actually walked the halls of North Miami Junior High School and North Miami Senior High School. And I think even back then we knew you were going to do big things. So it's been cool to kind of follow your career. It's really cool to have you on this program. So welcome in, David. How you doing?
I'm good, Ira. Thank you. And I appreciate the nice words. It's been quite a ride since we were last together in fifth or sixth grade. Crazy. Yeah. But, I've been following your career up in Tallahassee. You're very active on social media and you're very well known up there, and rightly so. And even though I grew up a Canes fan, I do watch the Noles because I lived there for 8 years as a state senator, and my niece now goes there. She's a freshman in the honors college at Florida State. Wow. And I encouraged her to go there. So even though we have a rivalry between our favorite college football teams, I have great respect for Florida State.
Appreciate it, man. So, going back to those days again, like going to public schools, you didn't go to, even though you ended up going to Harvard for college and law school, you didn't go to a prep school in Connecticut or Boston or something. You were, a public school kid, just like me and the rest of our friends from back home. But I think we all kind of knew there was a focus about you. There was a seriousness about you. You seemed to have goals. I think every year I feel like you were in the yearbook as like most likely to be president. Where did that come from? I was curious. We'll get into some current stuff and some legal cases and things like that. But where did that come from? Was it your parents? Like, where did that drive come from and purpose so early in your life?
I think you have to give credit to your parents whenever you are successful in life, and when you're not, they and you should always share the blame, because I always believe in personal responsibility. So I give them credit for my success, and anything I do that's a mistake, I own up to it, because I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. But when it comes to my career and my desire to go into politics, I think that was just a part of me, because my grandfather, after whom I'm named, who passed away before I was born, he was the mayor of Ashland, Kentucky. Not too many Aronbergs in Kentucky, but he was the mayor of this mid-sized town back then. And I think it skips a generation, and it was just something that was part of me innately. I just always wanted to be the person in front of the camera. I wanted to be the one who was the policymaker. There are a lot of people who want to work behind the scenes. God bless them. But I wanted to be the one to go in front of groups and try to share my vision and to listen and try to effectuate change. And I really have enjoyed my career in government life. I was a state senator for 8 years, a state attorney for 12 years. I was drug czar for Attorney General Pam Bondi in Tallahassee for 2 years, Tallahassee and West Palm Beach. And then I decided, I got married and I wanted to start a family. So let's try the private sector. So after all these years in government, I'm trying something new, a new challenge here at Dave Aronberg Law.
Okay, great. So congratulations. So you're hanging up a shingle and you're going to private practice. That's the plan now.
Yeah. It's different because you've been in government for so long that it's definitely a change. But after 12 years of being state attorney, I thought that I had accomplished what I had set out to accomplish. And also, I wanted a new challenge. I just, these jobs were never meant to be forever. I believe in term limits, even if they're self-imposed. So I wanted to try something new. And also, I love the TV stuff I'm doing. And, not being a government employee gives me more freedom to do more speaking gigs and TV. And, maybe one of these days someone will invite me to go on one of those cruises where I can give a speech and get a free cruise. It hasn't happened yet, but I hear they're great gigs to get.
So what kind of work will you be doing? You've been, as you said, the last 12 years as a state attorney, leading a team of over 100 prosecutors and trying a lot of, different cases. Are you going into criminal defense, or what kind of law are you going into?
Well, my firm, Dave Aronberg Law in West Palm Beach, we do civil and criminal litigation. We also do land use work and internal investigations. Also, the prominent government relations firm, Capital City Consulting, which is based in Tallahassee, Nick Ira and his team, they've opened up their office here in West Palm Beach, right here with me in this office. So I'm a strategic partner with them. So you've got a lot going on. You've got the legal side, you got the government relations side, and you have the TV and streaming side. I have my YouTube channel, Court Authorities. Hope your listeners or viewers will check it out. We go into the top legal and political matters of the day. And so I like to say we're at the intersection of law, politics, and true crime. And one of the crimes that we talk about pretty frequently is something that we'll talk about in a bit, which the world is watching in Tallahassee, the Danny Markel murder.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely want to talk about that because you have tremendous insight. The politics and law part of it, I was curious about as being a state attorney. Obviously you're an elected official, so you have to serve the people. But you also, you have to serve the law, and you also have, your own moral compass. But you've been involved in some, pretty high profile cases where all of that kind of intersects. And then there's pressure, probably political pressure. There's pressure from important people, wealthy people. How do you balance that as a state attorney?
A state attorney, you have to be willing to disregard the politics and the noise out there, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and you as state attorney have access to evidence, information that the public doesn't, but yet you're limited to what you can say. Right. So it's like you have to have thick skin enough to take all those shots from people who don't know what the facts are, but just going to accuse you of all sorts of things. I mean, I remember there've been how many times when I've made a decision based on the evidence and the law that someone in the public, usually it's a party to the case, disagrees with, and they'll say, "Well, who's paying you off? Who's on the take?" I'm like, well, if it shows how cynical we are of our government officials, that every time someone disagrees with you, it can't be because they see the information differently, or they have access to information you don't, or maybe they just have a different mindset, ideology, principles. It has to be you're on the take, right? It has to be there's money under, like, okay. But, you have to be able to have thick skin and just know that in government, it's a trust, and you have to do the public's trust, and it comes with arrows. And if you can't take the heat, if you can't take the arrows, it's probably not the right profession for you. But I've learned over time that, the public does. They do expect you and want you to do the right thing in every case. And they're smarter than the politicians give them credit for. They're smarter than people give them credit for, because they usually get it right. The people will get it. Like, you may have the extremists on both sides who will make a lot of the noise, but generally the people get it right. And if you have faith in the people, I think you'll be successful.
So when it comes to, again, some of these high profile cases that you're commenting on, because now I'm curious, do you see it from that perspective when you're asked to give your opinions, not just legally, but sometimes tactically about cases that are going on? And the fact that that you have that knowledge that the public doesn't always have all the information, does that change how you might give it, your opinions on cases? Because you won't have all the information as you do in your cases. Being
a legal commentator is different than being a state attorney. When you're a legal commentator, you don't have access to inside information. I was barred from talking about my own cases. But when you talk about someone else's cases, that's different. And you base your information on what you see in the media.
Right.
And so you're with everyone else just interpreting the data that you get that's out in the public. So when I talk about the Donna Adelson case, for example, I'm doing it based on what I see that's out there, not based on any internal conversations I've had with Jack Campbell. And I've had conversations with Jack Campbell, but he's not going to give up the ghost. He's not going to do something unethical and tell me stuff that I'm not allowed to know. So when I give my takes on that case and other cases, it's based on what's in the public domain.
Then one last question about the job as a state attorney general, because I've never, or state attorney, excuse me, because I've never had this conversation with you or really anybody in that position. When you have such a big office with several offices and 120, 100 and something prosecutors, how involved can you get, or how when do you decide like what you need to get involved with? I'm sure you have a great staff and people below you that make a lot of decisions, but how often did you have to kind of get involved in individual cases?
Well, the beauty of being state attorney is that you are essentially the CEO of the largest law firm in the county, and you get to set the agenda. You get to set the priorities. And if you want to go into court, you can do so. But if you want to just manage, you can do so. If you want to micromanage, you can do so. And you got to be careful about that. So I was in court for cases that I thought were very personal to me, like animal cruelty, felony animal cruelty cases. And that to me is just, as a dog lover, was just too important to pass up, because I wanted to send the message to the public that kind of case would not be tolerated here. That kind of incident, animal cruelty, would not be tolerated in Palm Beach County. And what better way to show it than to have the state attorney himself show up and prosecute the case himself? Wow. Plus, the laws are weak in that area. The punishments are relatively weak. And I wanted the judges to impose more serious penalties. And I thought if I was there, that would happen. So you can pick and choose. I've done a lot of first appearances where you see a lot of the cases that come into your office right at the beginning. Those are bond hearings. Done hundreds of those. And I think it gives you a great insight into the criminal justice system. So it's not just trying cases. You can do other things that get you really good exposure to what's going on.
You also, some of the other kind of high profile cases, not high profile, but, kind of missions of yours, it seemed like, was, cases of elderly abuse, and also these sober homes, which I had never even heard of, I think, until I saw you on television talking about them. But I guess it's, people profiting off of drug rehabilitation. And can you tell us about that and what you guys did there?
Sure. It was a priority of mine in my office to go after the opioid epidemic. And this is something I'd worked on for years. That's when I worked as drug czar in closing down the pill mills. But when it comes to what I was doing most recently, it was on the back end of the opioid epidemic through the corrupted drug rehabs. You had all these Americans who were addicted to opioids and other substances, and they would go to rehab many times in South Florida, right in my backyard. And you had all these rogue, unscrupulous rehabs opening up to take advantage of the Affordable Care Act, which would reimburse these providers on an old school fee-for-service basis. Now, when you add to that, under the Affordable Care Act, you have no limit how many times you can go through rehab on a yearly or lifetime basis. And now it's a recipe for abuse. You have what I call a relapse model rather than a recovery model, where you go in a detox and you get steered there by a marketer who sends you a one-way plane ticket to South Florida. And that's illegal. And then you go in there and you get, based on your insurance, 5 days of detox, and then you get sent to a rehab place, and everyone's getting kickbacks, which are illegal. And then after your insurance runs out, and all the while you're living in a sober home, which is just a group home that's not paid by insurance, but the sober home is probably giving you reduced or free rent illegally because you're going through this cycle. Everyone's getting a kickback. And then you're supposed to be sober after the insurance runs out. Well, you're dealing with someone with the brain disease of addiction. And so you have the marketer who will then pay the individual who's supposed to be sober, give them thousands of dollars to go on a bender for the weekend and then test dirty again and then go back into the rehab cycle over and over again until that person leaves in an ambulance or a body bag. Wow. That's the Florida shuffle. That's what I was trying to eradicate. And we really did a good job of cleaning up the bad players of the industry in Palm Beach County. We cleaned up the industry. I wrote a book about it. It's coming out within a few months, called Fighting the Florida Shuffle. It's always good to know the name of your own book. And it talks about this very scandal and how we're able to address it. The problem is this scandal has spread through the rest of the country where they don't have sober home task forces. One of the ways I was able to clean this up was to create this task force where we made 121 arrests since October of 2016. So it was a big success, but unfortunately, the rogue sober homes have opened up elsewhere.
Well, so as you mentioned before, the Dan Markel case, which obviously, anybody watching this, which, we're on the Deep Dive True Crime Network here on YouTube. There's tons of content about that case. There's tons of, podcasts and shows, and it's been on 2020 and everything else. But you had a real personal connection to Dan Markel. Could you just talk about that? I know you've talked about it before. If you could just briefly touch on that a little bit as well.
Well, I was friends with Dan Markel. When I was a state senator in Tallahassee, I would hang out with Dan Markel. He was a professor at FSU, and so I knew him. I really liked him. Was a fellow Harvard grad and involved with the Jewish community there. It was just he was a great guy. And no one deserves his fate, but especially not someone who gave so much up of himself, who loved his family so dearly. His world was his two sons. And yet, not only did he lose everything and lost his life, but the family that was implicated and prosecuted for killing Dan Markel, his in-laws, wiped Dan Markel's name off of the children's. So they totally wiped out his history. They wiped out the last name, and so now the kids move to South Florida, which is what the family wanted, right. And then they renamed them after the Adelsons instead of Markel. And so for a while, the Adelson family got everything that they desired, but then the long arm of the law caught up with them, and now we're seeing individuals from the Adelson family go to trial. And in the case of Charlie Adelson, the ex-brother-in-law, convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Now it's Donna's turn, and people want to know if Wendy, the ex-wife, is going to be next. Well, I say that I think so, probably, that she will be prosecuted next, but only if Donna is convicted. And I do think Donna will be convicted.
So what's it been like to watch it from I've watched this case pretty religiously, like probably everybody watching this show right now, pretty much gavel to gavel. But we don't have any legal expertise. I just know what I've seen in other trials and things like this. So do you watch it as like a coach watching another team play? Like, are you watching the X's and O's of the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, or are you more just Dan's friend?
Both. I watch it as Dan's friend, but also as a guest legal analyst. And I talk about this on various shows. Yeah. But I'm watching it as an outside observer. I'm not in the courtroom. I'm not privy to inside information. Also, I'm not able to watch every bit of the trials because I just don't have the time or the bandwidth to watch every bit of it. So I read the local paper in Tallahassee, and I see the social media accounts, and I see what the highlights that are shown on streaming, and I try to develop my own opinions. I was surprised when Katie Magbanua was able to get away with it the first time. She had a hung jury. It was one juror who held out because the evidence against her was just so overwhelming. Right. All it takes is one. It shows you how difficult a prosecutor's job is. You can have overwhelming evidence, and one juror out of 12 just doesn't want to send this woman with the big glasses and the sweater to prison, and now you have to do it all over again. But justice did come for her, and she's in prison for life, and she's trying to get out early because she's cooperating with the state, who has not promised her anything in return, but at least finally she's doing the right thing by telling the truth. It's late, but okay. She forced the state to try her twice. So now we've got Donna's trial, and then we'll see what happens next.
So, in a case where you've got, and I've heard I think I've definitely heard Georgia Kappelman talk about it. I'm sure every prosecutor says at some point that, when you bring out witnesses that are, have complicated backgrounds, Luis Rivera obviously is was a gangbanger, self-admitted, and, conspiracies and all crimes. And so now he's your lead witness. And now, as you said, Catherine Magbanua, with their two trials denying everything pretty much. And then now if you use her as a witness, what's the challenge there? And how, I guess, how do you weigh that as a prosecutor?
you have to sometimes hold hands with the devil to seek justice. And when the prosecutors gave Rivera the deal of like 7.5 more years in prison, that he was already in prison at the time, it was the right thing to do because he was the key to breaking the case. He testified against Garcia, who was the trigger man. And although they're both guilty for this murder, there are levels of culpability. The one who pulled the trigger is the most culpable, actually, of the two, between the two hitmen. And so they gave the other guy, the driver, the accomplice, a deal, but they needed his testimony. That's what broke the case and convicted Garcia. He's in prison for life. He's not getting out. And that's what led to Katie McBanawa. She's in prison for life. Maybe she'll get out one day, but she has to keep cooperating. And that led to Charlie Adelson, who's now in prison for life. And that led to Donna Adelson. They're going one by one meticulously, as opposed to just arresting everyone and sorting it out later. They're doing a really great job. Georgia Kaplan is outstanding. The people of Tallahassee, Leon County should be really thrilled with the state attorney's office there, because Georgia Kaplan would be a star at any state attorney's office. And so I just know this case is in good hands.
Now I know, and you're friends with Ruth Markel, Dan's mother, who we had on the show a couple weeks ago, and just an amazing woman. But I know she was frustrated early on because they didn't want to charge everybody. They did just charge. They just did charge Sergio at first, and then they've kind of moved through it, as you said, one by one. I think in her preference as a family member, why not just go after all of them at the same time? And I'm not asking you to judge her opinion, but how difficult is that as a prosecutor when you have a family that sees it a different way? And how do you feel an obligation to talk to them, or do you just kind of listen, I've got to do my job?
Well, you have a legal obligation to listen to them under Marsy's Law, which was enacted into the Florida Constitution just a few years ago. But you have to make your own decision. Marsy's Law does not require you to obey the commands of victims. You just have to listen to them. They have to be heard, and rightly so. So yes, Ruth Markel, I can understand why she'd be frustrated. It took like 9 years for there to be some real justice in the case. I mean, the killers went free for years. Finally, though,
spending the money that they got out of the case.
Yeah, and she's not even allowed to see her grandkids. Right. And the name Markel was wiped off the whole planet with the kids. The kids are now, they're Adelsons that live in South Florida. This is what the Adelson family wanted. They wanted the kids to live in South Florida. They wanted Danny out of the kid's life, and they got what they wanted for years. But eventually, justice came, and it's not done.
How, as somebody who's worked in that field and committed so much of your life to that field, how gratifying is? I mean, I know personally, you have the personal connections, but the way this case kind of got solved, it was kind of like old school police work. The bus, finding the footage of the Prius and then finding the transponder and all that. As somebody who worked in law enforcement, I mean, is that extra gratifying a little bit just to see the system kind of work that way? Yeah,
well, that's old gumshoe detective work, right? But we're living in a technological age where now, if you have a Sun Pass, we're going to know where you've been. Right. You have a cell phone, we'll be able to help track you. Right. There's cameras everywhere. So there are a lot of changes. It's not totally old fashioned. Maybe the fact that the detectives are calling people, talking to witnesses and tracking people down one by one, but yet the technology is different. And it's so much harder to get away with serious crimes these days. I mean, just ask Brian Koberger, another case I talk about, the alleged quadruple murder in the University of Idaho. He's a doctoral student fascinated by serial killers. Ted Bundy wasn't caught till late. These serial killers were going on and taunting police for years. Maybe he thought he would be the same, but he was caught pretty quickly. Why? Because of DNA, which didn't exist back then. So you have all these new things that didn't exist back in the days when we were growing up, you and I, Ira, watching, Matlock on TV.
The Rockford Files.
Right. The Rockford Files, even better.
But no, I think that's the thing. I think that's why serial killers, seems like to me, are able to become serial killers, because they're usually random, and that most crimes are committed by people and so if it's totally random and you don't have like some sort of a camera or something like that, that's why it becomes so difficult to get these cases. And like you said, the one in Iowa, I think would have, sometimes you wonder if these things will ever get solved. But in this case,
Idaho.
Yeah. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Idaho. And, in this case with Dan Markel, I think, to your point, one of the best witnesses, I thought, for the prosecution in all the trials so far, and I can't remember his name, the detective that handles all the cell phone data in Tallahassee for Leon County. I mean, it's amazing what they can do with that cell phone data. And really, it seems like you've got to get the jury who are laymen to understand it and to believe it. And I guess that used to be a challenge, but now it seems like people really believe the cell phone data and can trust it. It seems like.
Oh yeah. Yeah. People now, they know DNA is legit. I mean, back in the OJ Simpson trial, it was like, what is this stuff? But now they know, all right, DNA's gotcha. It's legit. But we're still living in a CSI generation where people see on TV how all the cases are wrapped up really neatly after the hour. And people expect, well, where is the smoking gun? Where is the camera that shows the video that shows the crime that occurred so we can watch it? Where is the DNA? And a lot of times you don't have that. You have circumstantial evidence. And circumstantial evidence, though, is often as good as direct evidence. You know, if you're seeing someone walk outside with an umbrella, well, you may not know it's raining, but you can tell by the person walking outside with the umbrella that it's raining. That's circumstantial evidence. So it can be really powerful evidence. But you know, if you're in the CSI generation where you say, well, where is it? I have to see a video of something. That's what prosecutors fear, because videos capture a lot, but not everything. DNA is really powerful, but it's not everywhere. So sometimes you just need circumstantial evidence that says, who else could have done this? Come on.
So, you talking about the Adelson case, and you do believe Donna, Wendy's mother, Dan's ex-wife's mother, will end up being convicted. What do you just think it's the same testimony that we've seen in these other cases, or do you think they need more to take it? Because she's a little bit a step removed, I guess we'd say, from where Charlie and Catherine McBanova were. Yes,
and I think that was by design, but I think there's enough evidence. Part of the evidence is her own doing by trying to flee the country with one-way tickets. I mean, that is conscience of guilt, and I think the jury is going to hate her for that. I think also just the testimony of Catherine McBanova that she was the one who was dropping off the money, and that the money was wet because she took money laundering literally, or just the bump. The bump was just fascinating. They had this undercover cop who approached her on the street to try to extort money from her, saying that he was affiliated with one of the parties, and she did not tell police. She didn't call police. That's what you would do if someone came up to you in this case and said, "Hey, I need money. You got to take care of my person." Ira, you would call police. Like, what the hell? She didn't do that. She called the number, and after she resisted and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have no idea." At the end, you remember her last line before she said goodbye? She said something to the effect of, "I'll call you back." Like, that's not what someone who's innocent does. So to me, there's plenty of circumstantial evidence to convict her here.
It seems like even the smartest people, we're dealing in a case here with a lot of really smart people, maybe not street smart as much as they think, but really smart people. These are professionals. They've been successful. But it seems like one of the comments, I had a defense attorney on our most recent show, and he made a comment that people on the stand are not as good at liars as they think they would be. Right. Do you think people, I mean, to plan out a crime and really get away with it? I mean, you can be smart and fail miserably. I mean,
yeah. That's Charlie Adelson. He's the maestro. Right. I mean, I didn't call him that. That's what he calls himself. Right. It's just the license plate on his car. On some Lamborghini, I think it was, some fancy car at the maestro. Well, the maestro thought he could con the jury with some ridiculous double extortion plot, some explanation that he was the one being extorted by Katie McBanova, and that her boyfriend was trying to get money out of him. But that's not exactly how extortion works. Extortion is, you better pay me or else I'm going to kill you. That's some
family member or something. Yeah,
right, exactly. Right. But what extortion is not is that you drive 8 hours from Miami to Tallahassee twice, and then you scope out, and then you kill the person's enemy. You kill the person's enemy, then you come back and say, "Okay, now you got to pay me, or else I'm going to do the same to you." What? Why do you have to do that part? You just go to that person and say, "Hey, you better pay me, or else I'm going to kill you." I mean, you're a gangbanger, right? You're involved with a gang. You at least have affiliates with a gang. You're a dangerous person. So the double extortion plot did not make any sense. But Charlie was really good in
gosh,
like a sociopath. He's really good at. He had a lot of time though in jail by himself to think about it, and he performed pretty well. But again, it's what I said earlier. The people get it right. I mean, whether it's voters or jurors, they generally get it right. They saw right through this guy. A quick guilty verdict.
So you mentioned the channel you've got now. If you want to tell people again the name of the channel you have.
Yeah, thank you. It's Court Authorities on YouTube. where we meet at the intersection of law, politics, and true crime. We talk about the Adelson case. We also talk about some of the political, legal stuff we're seeing out there, and not afraid to take on controversial issues. And Ira, thank you for letting me plug the channel. I have to have a couple minutes left if you're okay. All right, good.
Yeah. I just want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Why do you think, you didn't plan out to become a YouTube, commenter and on all these different shows? Why do you think people like myself, and I'm doing this is not my full-time job either. Why do you think there's such a fascination in true crime? Like, why do you think people are just so kind of focused on this topic?
It's interesting. And I've gone to Crime Con and presented there, and especially among women. You go to Crime Con, there's really no line for the men's room. It's mostly women. And it's interesting. I've tried to look up some theories about, some studies about why it's so popular, especially amongst women. And there are a lot of different explanations. But, this is the stuff that you used to see on TV. It was always popular on TV as a fiction, but now you get it as nonfiction. And these cases are really compelling. And now you have a way to tell it online streaming where you don't need expensive budgets and actors, production companies to do it. You can just talk about a case and people are engrossed by it. They're fascinated by it. And I think it's here to stay as far as a popular area to discuss. And, we focus exclusively originally on true crime, but we've expanded to the legal political stuff. We have an affiliation with the Midas Touch Network. And so we do some of the legal political stuff, but our roots are in true crime at court authorities.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate it, man. And shout out to Leonard Glazer, maybe John Maffey, some of our teachers and administrators from back in the day. And
Mr. Glazer passed away years ago. Hopefully, our teachers are still around because they made a big difference in our lives. And it's great to reconnect with you, my friend.
You too. Hopefully, I'll see you around, and look forward to watching you on your new channel. And good luck with the practice. I really appreciate you coming and join us.
Thank you, Ira.
And thanks again for everybody watching here. Again, if you like the video, like it, subscribe to the Deep Dive True Crime Network, and we'll talk to you next time on Trial Talk.